Hi everyone, in this video I wanted to talk about some cheap alternatives for art supplies that I would recommend using because you don't really need to use like super expensive stuff all the time, obviously, but I didn't really realize this when I was just starting out with drawing, but now most of the stuff I use in my sketchbook is fairly cheap supplies because the thing I use most of all is just a really cheap mechanical pencil, and that's like one of my favorite drawing utensils ever. So you really don't need a lot of money to make art. You don't need a lot. I'm just talking about if you're just going to be like sketching in your sketchbook or practicing, you really don't need anything fancy at all. And I didn't really realize this as a beginner artist, like I said, but I thought I would just tell you some of my recommendations for cheaper stuff to use. And I currently use a lot of these things in my sketchbook now, and I'm really sorry if my voice sounds disgusting. If I knew this first tip when I was first beginning drawing, I would have done this all the time. And this is the fact that you can actually really easily make your own sketchbook, and you can even make it from just printer paper or whatever kind of paper you have lying around. And there's actually a type of paper, it's not printer paper, but it's kind of like the step above printer paper, and it's really, really nice and smooth, and I would recommend using that as well if you have it or if you can get it. The standard weight for it is like 25 pounds, I think. It might just be 20 pounds. Yeah, 20 pounds, I think, is the standard for printer paper. But then I think if you get the higher weight, like the 24 pound or like 30 pound, it's usually like really good. It's nice and smooth, it feels thicker, and it will feel more like a sketchbook paper. So if you don't want to buy a sketchbook, just draw on printer paper. Just draw on whatever paper you have, and you can bind it together really easily. I have 2 different sketchbook videos that I'll link here so you can check them out if you want. There's also lots of tutorials on YouTube. And something else that I've realized recently is the fact that you can draw with anything. And I kind of already mentioned this, but it doesn't have to be an art supply. It can be anything that makes a mark on a paper. You can draw with that. And also, cheap ballpoint pens falls under this, and those are everywhere. Like ballpoint pens, you can find those anywhere, and I love sketching with ballpoint pen. It's like a good mix between ink and pencil because you can do lighter strokes, but it's also permanent. So I would definitely recommend using ballpoint pen. You can get a really nice look with them, and it just lasts. They're just easy to use, they're easy to find, they're inexpensive, and I would definitely recommend trying that. It's a really good cheap supply. I always try to keep one with me. It has a very unique look to it. It comes in all different kinds of colors. I think the most standard one though is blue, but I mean that's fine. I used to always get a giant multicolor pack of ballpoint pens when I was in school. I wanted like every single color because some packs come with brown and orange and teal and just like weird colors, and I wanted them all. Another thing that I think is important to know, but I think a lot of people know this actually, is that you can paint with dollar store paint. You can paint with the really cheap tubes of craft paint. I used to use them all the time, and it's really, really good way to practice painting because I learned to paint with those paints in high school. That's the kind of paint we used. It was like the really cheap dollar store stuff, and it works well. It's just super thin on the page. People say it might not last very long, but for practicing, it's perfect. It works really well, and I would definitely recommend you use it. And I'll show you some of mine, and I'll show you some examples of me using the paint. I still keep a whole bunch of it, and this paint is just so versatile. You can use it for craft projects, you can paint with it. I really like this paint even though it's cheap, and I don't really think it lasts too long. Or like, by last long, I mean light fastness, or like will it start flaking or will it start yellowing? I don't know. But I know of like some people that use it. And I wonder if you could even mix it with more expensive paint and then it would be better. I wonder if you could do that. Another thing that I actually know of a lot of people who use this, and those are crayons. And crayons are really good. They're so pigmented. They have a really nice soft texture to them. You can layer the colors on top of each other. Crayons are a really good art supply, and they're super cheap. Like I think you can get a whole bunch of colors for just $1 at the dollar store, and they have a really cool look to them. They're shiny. One thing they will do if you're using a sketchbook and you use crayons in the sketchbook, the little flakes of wax might get on the other page and it might spread around, but it's not the worst thing in the world. They're really hard to get off the page once you put it on the page, but I think that's just how some things work. Like like ink you can't get off the page. But crayons are a really good art supply. And if you haven't thought of using them before as an art supply or like in your sketchbook, I would definitely recommend you try them out. Again, I'm not sure how light fast they are or how long they last over time, but in a sketchbook, they're perfect. Another cool supply I like to use are highlighters, and I don't really know how expensive highlighters are, but I think they're pretty easy to find, especially if you're in school. And I usually like to use highlighters as just to add like pops of color to my sketchbook or to block in backgrounds behind sketches to make them stand out. You can just color with them. They can be a good way to just see how colors look together. Just be like a good practice of using colors because they're so bright. It could be a fun challenge to tone them down and make it look nice. So highlighters are a really good option for markers. And a pencil crayon that I used all the time as a beginner artist were Crayola pencil crayons. And there's a lot of cheap pencil crayon brands out there, and a lot of them don't work too well. I remember like having Rose Art ones, and the Rose Art pencil crayons they're really hard to use. They don't really go on the paper too well, but Crayola pencil crayons work really nice, and they're really good. They're like one of my I think they're my favorite cheaper options for pencil crayons or colored pencils. I know sometimes I say pencil crayons and people are like, what's that? What's a pencil crayon? And that's just what we call them in Canada, I think. But I know they're actually called colored pencils, but when I say pencil crayon, that's what I mean. So Crayola pencil crayons are really neat. I still have a set that I bought, and I keep them because I like them. These things might seem really obvious to other people, but they weren't obvious to me. And when I was like sketching in my sketchbook as a beginner, I would always use pencil. I never just used ink. I never used ballpoint pens. I never used pencil crayons to just sketch. But obviously, like, that's normal. Like, everyone does that, but I didn't really even consider using just, like, colored pencils to sketch with until I saw other people doing it online. That's what made me realize that sketching in color was a thing. I didn't even realize that when I was a beginner. Another really cheap supply that is like a staple for me are mechanical pencils. And I'm talking about the giant multi-pack you can get at, like, Dollarama for, like, $2. And I personally don't like the lead that it comes with. I think it's too hard. So I usually buy separate lead at like Staples or something, and then I just replace the lead with that. For sketching in pencil, that's what I use. I love mechanical pencils. I also have some regular pencils, and just like use normal pencils. I've never really like bought like artist quality pencils before. Except for when I'm in school, that's kind of like what you gotta use because you need the softer lead. Like I bought some nicer ones for school, but just at home, I just use whatever pencil I can find because you don't need really nice pencils, especially when you're sketching. Like pencils is like one of the things that it doesn't really matter how good of quality it is. It'll always work. It's like it always feels the same. Like pencil lead always feels the same no matter what the quality, at least to me. So save your money on the pencils because you don't need good pencils. So I hope you got something from this video. I'm sorry if all of these were really obvious to you. They just weren't obvious to me when I was learning how to draw, so I thought I would share these things that I now use and these like really cheap options for making art and for practicing. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry if my voice sounded too gross. I have a cold right now and I really needed to record something, so I'm sorry. And I'll see you in my next video.